From the 15th to 20th century, the royal Habsburg family was at the forefront of the ruling class. And then it all ended abruptly because of one thing: incest. Join Sophia and I as we dive into the many secrets of this strange royal family. From their conquests and terrors to inbreeding, genetic mutations, and diseases, hop into our Morbid Time Machine and let's get into it.
Welcome, inquirers, new and old. Have you ever wanted to go down a rabbit hole of morbid history, but you don't know where to start?
Then you are in the right place. Our Grand Pass is a podcast where each week we explore messed up history.
From shipwrecks and spooky places to morally questionable people and practices, we're Sophia
And Maya.
Join us in our Morbid Time Machine.
And let's discuss history's most fucked up.
Hey, Maya!
Hi, Sophia!
Oh my gosh, this is your first time leading an episode!
Yes, it is. I'm so excited! Especially because it's the Habsburg family, which I've been obsessed with for many years.
Yes.
Because for our listeners, one of the most interesting things about the Habsburg family is, well, of course, it's a ruling aristocratic family, but the inbreeding is insane in this family, you guys, and we'll go into it more. But I just think it's so interesting when historically people did that, but it was also looked like people frowned upon it. Yeah, but it still happened,
especially rich people, because they're we got to keep our power somehow.
And I'm like, okay.
No, another famous kind of inbred family, King Tut.
Yeah.
Not something we'll get into very much today, but super inbred.
Yeah.
Led to a lot of issues.
Because he died young from a genetic disease, right?
Yeah, and he also, all of his kids that he had with his wife, who I think was his sister.
Oh.
Were all stillborn.
Yeah, that's actually, that's what is actually very common. Yeah. It happened in the Habsburgs family too. Another one is actually, which we'll also get into later, is the Romanov family. Yes. I believe, because Alexei Romanov had a genetic mutation. I'm pretty sure it was caused from incest. So,
what's that? Not really.
It's so fun.
Mm-hmm.
The moral of this story will be to say no to incest, and I hope you all actively choose that every single day, to say no to incest.
Have you seen that TikTok where she's like, if they're in the family tree, you should always let them be? I will find that TikTok and we will post that on the Instagram. Please. We will link that in our Instagram and in the description. Pops up on my For You page, I don't know, once a month, and it cracks me up always.
I've seen the ones where it's this guy interviewing people in the South, and it's I think it was a woman. I saw a woman and a guy do it, and this woman was interviewing a couple, and she's like, would you date your cousin? And the guy was like, I mean, sure. Or would you kiss your cousin? And the guy was like, I mean, sure. And the girl was like, no. And it was like, have you kissed your cousin? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, ugh. And then the girl didn't know that, and I was like, that's
they were dating?
Yeah, the girl wasn't his cousin. It was,
but the guy and the girl were dating.
Yeah, the guy and the girl were dating, but she didn't know he had kissed his cousin.
Oh my gosh!
I was like,
that's,
you shouldn't be Sweet Home Alabama type horror.
Yeah,
yeah. So
Habsburgs did Sweet Home Alabama before it was cool.
Yeah, they
never is cool.
Alabama in Spain.
In Spain.
So
make it clear, incest has never or will never be cool.
No, it's not, you guys. Please
don't.
We're putting this out there because we're talking about genetic mutations and incest, but it's not good.
Not at all.
No. Anyway,
don't sleep with your cousins, folks.
Yeah. All right.
Or your siblings. Or anyone.
The siblings are dating trend is insane.
Right.
It's because sometimes I'm like, you look very similar.
Yeah.
Because then this also gets weird because people date people that look exactly like them, and that's a weird, I don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This weird mental thing.
I know, right? It's very Freudian.
Not saying that they're mental. But
no.
It's a thing in their brain.
It's very Freudian is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I could do a whole rant about Sigmund Freud. Episode idea.
Easter egg, you guys.
Easter eggs.
Oh my god, we're getting ideas left and right. All right, well, should we head into the...
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, so we're going to start with a bit of a backstory and timeline of the Habsburg family. So, to start off with, we're going to start with a fun fact. They were actually named after a castle on their land, and the castle's name was like Habsburg type B, and then they're like, we should totally name ourselves that, which not very creative.
Nope.
But it's what we had to do at that time, and as you'll find out, they were not very creative with names either. So, starting off strong, like the family started, but I'm going to go a little bit after the family was established. But a man named Rudolph II of Habsburg acquired the castle and the surrounding land after some disputes. He died in 1232. This is important. He left his inheritance to his two sons, Albert IV and Rudolph III. But Rudolph III's descendants sold their part to Albert's descendants before Rudolph's family line died out in, I think, 1408. So it took a while to die out, but like they kind of are a bit redundant in this area. So Rudolph IV, who got all that land and stuff, had a son. Albert IV had a son who he named Rudolph IV. This is where I'm like, they're not very creative with names. And Rudolph IV was elected as the first German king from the Habsburg family, and then renamed himself Rudolph I because he was the first king. So creative. And this happened in 1273.
That kind of reminds me of, like, in England with, I think it was, like, James V or James VI or something like that. And he was James V or VI in England, but he was also the King of Scotland, and he was, like, James the First over there.
Yeah, so it's insane.
Royal names are interesting and confusing.
And then it was he who in 1282 bestowed Austria and Syria to his two sons. Guess their names. Albert and Rudolph.
Hey.
And this Albert was the future German king Albert I. And then this other Rudolph was Rudolph II of Austria, according to Britannica.
I'm sorry. Every time you say Rudolph, my immediate thought is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
Yeah, so it's giving Christmas.
Whole thought.
All right. And so there were some conflicts that happened with all of the land dividing and stuff, but from what I've read, it was fairly peaceful. It was kind of just more like, I don't really like you taking land, but we own all this, and how do we divide it? And then from what I read, there was an interesting, like, instance where they had a really interesting government system, and they conquered land to build up their empire, and some places actually had this interesting voting system for a little bit to, like, vote for their rulers in a way. And there's also this whole stuff where one of them, it was very specific because one of the Habsburgs did not have any sons, and he had two daughters, and then one died very young, so he wasn't sure if his other daughter would, like, make it to adulthood. And so he actually wrote that his daughter would inherit his land, and if that didn't work, it would go to his niece.
So he was very
interesting. Maybe feminist, probably not, because he's a man. But
especially in when was it, 1400s, 1200s?
Yeah, somewhere around there. So, like, this is building up their empire. And then there's this guy, Habsburg, named Frederick V, who was a senior representative of the inner Australian line. And he was elected the German king in, we're doing a time skip, 1440. And then he was also crowned the Holy Roman Empire as Frederick III.
Wait, so what was he in Germany?
He was the German king.
But was he Frederick
He's Frederick V.
And then he's Frederick III in the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, but that is in 1452, so he'd already been the German king for a while. And then he was the last emperor like that to be crowned in Rome.
Oh,
which is cool.
Interesting.
And then what basically happened is, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but they were like, oh my god, we've conquered too much land to be under one ruler. And they were like, let's just split it. And so they divided their land among different, like, Habsburg branch families.
Okay.
And then here's where it gets interesting. They conquered Spain, which is important because the Spanish line of the Habsburgs was started. And with this, they decided to start being incestuous, which isn't cool, you guys. And I like this quote that I found from, I think it's from Britannica, and it's the result in a few generations was a fatal inbreeding that brought the male line of Charles V to extinction. I was like, truth, because you guys, incest is bad.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Don't do it.
So that's a bit of a brief little history before we get to the Spanish Empire. And like, I'm not going to go too deep into all the family stuff in the Spanish Empire. I just wanted to give a background of like, what were the Habsburgs? So now on to Spain. From the bloodline, you guys can probably tell, which we will have a picture of on our Instagram, the Habsburgs really liked interfamily marriage. So the question you might be wondering is, why exactly did they choose to intermarry? We talked about this a little bit already, but they did it to keep the Habsburg family in power. They were very, very fearful of their blood being cut out of the royal line eventually. So it's like, as they would marry other people, eventually the Habsburg blood wouldn't actually be in the family anymore. Which, okay, but also what? Yeah, so that isn't really cool, you guys. And if you guys are history nerds like me, you probably already have heard of this thing called the Habsburg jaw. We talked about it a little bit in our trailer as well. And it's basically where their jaws are super duper messed up from all those genetic mutations. And scientifically, like the medical term for it is mandibular prognatism. I think that's how you say it. I might be wrong, you guys. I'm not a medical student. And it's classified as a protrusion of your upper or lower jaw, and sometimes both. And it can cause a severe underbite, and your teeth don't line up like they're supposed to. And some pictures are kind of like goofy, and we will have some on our Instagram, and they're just like icky. But it's really interesting because if you look at portraits of Habsburg family members, you can like see the jaw line in them. And so that's fun and that's interesting, and that is used as historical evidence for the Habsburg jaw.
Well, and the other interesting thing too, kind of like with paintings, is paintings and photographs are very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was really, really easy for royals to be like, hey, you don't show that, otherwise I'm not paying you, and you're gonna be shunned. So, like, the fact that, like, even those protrusions, it almost makes me think, well, what if they were still a little bit proud of that? Like, hey, we've gotten this far.
Yeah,
like, it's showing their purity.
They were a bit about it. It was like, shows that you're a Habsburg, but it eventually got really bad.
Yeah.
But, like, with the portraits and stuff, like, I talk about Marie Antoinette a little bit now, and we'll have an episode later, but, like, with portraits, they got skewed so much, especially marriage portraits.
Yeah.
Like, hers was, I think they made her look a little younger than she was, or something like that. Or they changed hers slightly. She was like, that's so crazy. And she got a portrait of her husband, and she was like, okay. And then she saw him in real life, and he was not the same person.
Well,
he was like several inches shorter, and like his body type was completely different in the portrait and in real life, I'm pretty sure.
Well, that's kind of also what happened with Anna of Cleves, Henry VIII's fourth wife.
Yeah.
They were barely married. But he was like, well, you don't look like you did in your portrait. I'm not gonna marry you because you're ugly. Which is like, dude, chill.
Yeah. Watch the musical 6, you guys. It's so good.
I love 6.
Okay, anyway. Back to the Habsburg family. But basically, another interesting thing is the Habsburg, like, genetic mutations did affect both male and female members of the Habsburg line, but it was very, very much so more prominent in men than in women. So for women, it would be more like their jaw was slightly out, and it would be more about like their lower lip or their upper lip would be more protruding or something, and sometimes with their nose would be a little off, but for men it was like really bad. So there is that. And from what I found, there has for a while obviously been speculation that the Habsburg jaw was connected to inbreeding because they were incestuous and they had a weird jaw, which you can kind of connect the dots. But it was, from the readings that I've done, it was confirmed in a 2019 study by I think how you say his name is Roman Vilas. If I botched your name, I'm very sorry. And according to the source that I found, the research analyzed portraits from 66 members of the Habsburg clan and then zoned in on 15 monarchs who had the family's pronounced jawline and underbite, which I've talked about earlier. And the team found 18 different abnormalities in the Habsburg faces and used their portraits to calculate the degree to which different members of the Habsburg dynasty were inbred. So this can only do so much, again, because they are portraits and not pictures, and things are going to be slightly different, but you can do general like guessing with it. And the researchers did find that the Habsburgs had both mandibular prognatism and a mandibular deficiency. And so the effects of intermarriage caused these problems that followed a recessive pattern and showed up in the lower third of the face. And with that, I'm not going to go too deep into the medical stuff because this is a history podcast, not a medical one. But basically for genetic stuff, when people have very different genes, they can get recessive and dominant genes and they match and they end up with a kid with recessive and dominant genes and they fit together. But if you have two people with very similar genes, the recessive and dominant genes don't mix well together. And that's where you get genetic mutations in stuff that's affected by inbreeding. So that's why it's bad. You shouldn't do it.
No.
And then, guess what? The Habsburg Empire ended with a man named Charles II, the Spanish Empire.
Yes.
Since his genetic mutations were so bad that he physically could not have children.
Damn.
He literally, he couldn't. There was just there's nothing there to give for children. And it's also really interesting because his jaw was so bad, he had trouble speaking and eating.
Oh.
Yeah. And Charles II's father, Philip IV, had married his own sister's daughter. He married his niece.
Ew.
Which is insane, which was a crazy close relationship that made him both Charles' father and great uncle. So that's why Charles' stuff was so messed up. And researchers have found that this inbreeding stuff that his father did with marrying his niece, the level of it, because there's basically an equivalent of if it's your sibling or your cousin or your second cousin, right? Mm-hmm. And he married his niece and had a child with his niece, and that for Charles was the equivalent of having a child born with your sibling, I'm pretty sure.
Ooh.
That was it was almost as high as that. Which is a little insane, but there's some really cool research about this done in the research article called The Role of Inbreeding in the Extinction of a European Royal Dynasty, which will be linked in the description. It's super interesting. It's kind of medically with numbers and stuff because it is a literal research article, but it's super interesting. And then I also have a little fun fact I've talked about before, but your favorite girl, Marie Antoinette, is actually a member of the Habsburg clan. And she wasn't affected as much by the incest traits, but she had a bit of a protruding lower lip, and that's about it. And she was actually viewed as one of the most beautiful people of her time. So that's pretty cool, but she is a Habsburg, and I just think that's interesting, and we will talk about her so much more later on.
Yeah, but she also wasn't from the Spanish line. She was from...
No, she's from... I'm pretty sure she's from an Austrian one, because they, the Habsburg Empire was insane. It had such a far reach, and so that's why I think it's, is really cool. There's a really big, German-Austrian family, and their descendants are still alive today. There is a man named, I think, Karl Habsburg, who he's, I think, in his 60s at this point, and he does not have, the genetic mutation traits, though.
Wait, so is he, a royal or something?
Yeah,
or...
I also found a fun fact about him. He was the first royal to be diagnosed with COVID-19.
Dang.
2020. Yeah.
Dang.
But he was it was fine. It just felt like the flu. I was okay, shout out to you. But yeah, so it's very interesting. I recommend you all to go research a little bit more, and you can research specific people too and see how it works. And there's obviously different lines within the Habsburgs, and why they chose to be incestuous, technically, I guess makes sense from an aristocratic, because they wanted to keep a hold of their power. Although incest was kind of normal, it was more so normalized as in maybe you're gonna marry your second cousin or something, just because a lot of different royalty and people of high status all kind of came from the same group of people. That was more so what it was. So it was oh yeah, my second cousin over there, which is from a different family with a different last name, but we're still technically related.
Well, wasn't Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, they were cousins?
Yes. So, it happened multiple times, but with the Habsburgs, it was just so much because they did it, every single generation, and they married people who were a lot closer in blood than other royal families, and for their case, they also had a significantly more amount of genetic mutations than most other families.
Well, probably because they were so close, they were marrying so closely within their family tree.
Yeah, so that kind of just kept happening. and happening until it couldn't anymore. And they had power from around this 13th century, from when they became like the first German king to, I think it's like 1918-ish when they started to really fall. And at a point, their empire included Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Croatia, and then large parts of Poland, Romania, and Italy. And then they also obviously took over Spain.
Well, I guess Italy makes sense, like Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, they did. It was really, like, they were an insanely powerful family. And so I guess that does make sense why they wouldn't want to let go of that to anyone. Especially, I guess, because they were taking over so many other countries, they'd have to marry people of the countries they're taking over, which maybe they were like, I don't want to do that.
Well, and I know, like, with a lot of royals, it's like, well, we don't want to marry below our station.
Yeah, that was a big thing.
It's like, we aren't going to marry peasants.
And they thought their blood was so super cool because they were like, we're the best family ever. But
it's like, no. Well, your blood was kind of cool, but not in the way you think.
Yeah.
It was cool because there was so much wrong with it.
Yeah. And like, once again, with the incest stuff, other royal families did it, but it was more so, I think, for the most part, only occasionally. Like, it didn't happen every generation.
No, because especially in my European history class that I took, think you took that too?
I did take that one.
Yeah. I feel like it was like, oh yeah, no, this royal married this other royal and they were distant cousins, but they were from different countries to solidify their power. And it wasn't like, oh no, this guy married his cousin or his niece or his sister. Like,
cousin marriage at some points did become pretty popular.
Yeah. But it was like normally like second cousins or.
Yeah. And also a lot of the time, here's the thing that happened. There were a lot of, with incest marriages, there's a lot of like stillborn deaths or miscarriages and stuff because it's not supposed to happen in children with those types of genetics. It doesn't work out the best way. And like when they're born, that's why they have genetic mutations. So with that, it was kind of like a bad omen to like give birth to stillborn and stuff like that. So that's why they stopped, kind of.
Yeah, except for the Habsburgs.
Except for the Habsburgs, because they were forced to stop because Bro could not have children.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just want to share that with the world because I very much so hate the Habsburgs. And I was like, why would you ever choose to do that? And like, okay, but what?
Don't date your cousins.
Oh, moral of the story.
Don't date your cousins. Thanks for listening. Join us next week as we have Cadence back and we talk about the Villisca axe murders.
Ooh.
Thank you for joining us today. As always, all sources will be listed in the show notes below.
Be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out on our upcoming discussions. Join us next week as we delve into the intriguing depths of our grim past.
Stay curious. There's so much more to uncover.